Welcome to the weekly class in Jewish law. We are currently studying the Mishnah Berurah, the laws of davening, and this week we'll be discussing the laws of praying while drunk. Is it allowed, encouraged, discouraged, forbidden, an abomination? Let's see. So we're in the Mishnah Berurah, if you have Siman Tzadi Tes, which is 99, and we're going to, God willing, do the whole Siman. Now, don't take any practical halachas until we finish, because the Ramah is going to qualify everything that is said at the end. Okay, so we have Shasa Yain Kedei Revius. If you drink wine, the amount of a Revius, it's like this much in a cup. Al Yispalel Ad Sheyasar Yeno. You shouldn't pray until the wine leaves your system. Vim Shasa Yaiser. If you drink more than Revius, more than like this, maybe a little less than a cup. Im Hu Yachal Adavar Lifnei Melech. If you can speak before the king. Im hispalel tfilaso tfila. If you pray, your prayer counts. Meaning, again, all these halachas, these laws, we're talking about Shemona Esrei, the 18 blessing prayer. V'im ena yachal ledaber lifnei melech. If you can't speak in front of the king, you're so drunk that you can't even talk in front of the king. Im hispalel tfilaso toeva. If you pray, your prayer is an abomination. So if you're drunk to the point where you wouldn't be able to speak properly in front of the king, then your prayer is an abomination to God. You have to go back and pray when the wine leaves your system. And even if the time of prayer has elapsed, you have to go back and pray again, like the law of someone who mistakenly forgets to pray. That law is that if you forget to pray, let's say mincha, you daven Mariv twice, or if you forget Shacharis, you do Mincha twice. If you forget the evening service, you do the morning service twice. So let's say during lunchtime, you prayed, you drank too much, and you davened when you were super drunk. So that doesn't count, and you would have to pray Mariv 2 times. V'din Kriya Shema kedin Tefillah, the Ramah adds that the same laws that apply to davening while drunk apply to saying Shema. Aval shar brachos yachol levarech afal pi shehu shikur. But other blessings you can make even though you're drunk. Okay, so that was the Shulchan Aruch and Ramah. Let's see what the Mishnah Berurah has to say on this. Shasa yayin, v'nira dehu adin shar mashkin hamashakrin. It's not only wine, but even other beverages which intoxicate. Ukfi ma shekasav ataz lekaman b'siman kuf chav ches seif katan lamed hey le'inyan esiyas kapayim. Va'afilo das Magen Avram sham demekel b'nesiyas kapayim mistavro v'tfilah chamura v'aser kumam b'yayin. He says there's a debate if a kohen could bless the people with Birkas Kohanim if he's drunk. And there's a debate over there whether that's only if he's drunk with wine is an issue, or even other things. But he says everybody agrees when it comes to prayer that even if you're drunk from beer or scotch, it's not only wine, it's not a law that's specific to wine, but if you're drunk from anything, you are not allowed to pray. Kain kaz b'sefer Magen Gibor man sham v'lefidas ataz l'kaman is galei lo be'inin b'shar mashkin shi revius ein sham v'linira demikol makom be'inyan shibo kadei l'shaka b'revius yain. So when we had this law that if you drank a little bit, you shouldn't pray, we said you need a revius, which again is like this much, I guess, or a little less than a cup. So he says that doesn't apply for scotch and beer. Whatever level that a revius of wine causes an intoxication would be that measurement by beer or scotch or whatever. So by scotch it might be much less. Kedei revius, dafke im shasu b'vasachas. So now when we said that if you drink a revius of wine, you should not pray. Meaning, if you just had a sip of wine, no issue, go pray. But we said if you have a revius, if you have half a cup, you shouldn't pray right away. So that's only if you drink it at one time. I know I don't drink a lot, so when I have that first cup of wine on Pesach, I can feel the effect a little bit, especially for people that are a lot smaller. I'm sure you'll feel it more. But if the wine is diluted, or you drank it not at one time, but you sipped it in a bunch of times until you drank that much, then there's no issue. But if you drank more than a revius, so even if you drank it not at one time, you need to wait until the alcohol leaves your system. Now all this is when you're able to speak in front of the king. If you can't speak in front of the king, no matter how much you drank, you can't pray. If you're drinking wine, now we were just talking about drinking wine, and you're sitting there drinking, but if you're in the middle of a meal drinking wine, then it doesn't intoxicate so much, and it's not an issue. Okay, Al Yispal, we said if you drank a revius of wine, don't pray. Now, he says even if the time for prayer is going to pass, let's say the sun is going to set at 7 p.m., you drink a little bit of wine at 6:30, and you're not going to be able to daven mincha. So he says, nevertheless, don't pray. Now we're going to see at the end, this might not be practical halacha, but this is the opinion of the Pri Chadash. V'ayim b'sof hasimin b'shem hayam shel shleima da'achshav shebalav hachi ein mechavnen kol kach b'tfila in lachush kol lahachmer im ayidei amtani yavor zman tefila. So he even says it over here that if you just drink a little bit and you're not drunk, so really the law was that you still shouldn't pray. You should wait till all the wine leaves your system. But he says nowadays we really don't focus on prayer so much, right? Back in the day they used to take prayer very seriously, and people used to daven with a lot of intent. But nowadays we don't have such intent. So he says if you just drank a little bit and you're not drunk and the time for prayer is going to pass you by, then you should pray because you're not really losing out much than if you wouldn't have drinking a little bit. Now again, we're not talking about drunk. Drunk is another issue which we'll talk about soon. He says even if you're a guy who drinks a lot and you have a high tolerance, nevertheless if you drank a revius of wine, you still shouldn't pray. To'eva. So we said that somebody who is drunk to the point where he's not able to speak in front of a king, where he's slurring his words and all those types of things, if he prays, then it's an abomination. And Vahavi Ki'ilu Ovid Akum, the Mishnah Berurah says it's like someone who serves an idol. He says if someone's drunk and he doesn't pray, right, he withholds himself from praying, then he will be saved from all calamities, all pain. Kedin Shogeg, Vafilu Hischel Lishtos Achashig Yizmana. So now we said that if you started drinking and you, let's say, got drunk and you didn't daven, or you davened and it didn't count, right? If you started drinking, you got drunk, and then the time for davening is going to pass by. So you started drinking at 6, you're super drunk, so you can't daven mincha. The sun sets at 7, so you daven ma'ariv twice. So the law is that you do 2 ma'arivs because anytime you mistakenly forgot to daven, you daven twice. Now, there's a caveat here. That halacha that you daven twice if you miss a prayer, that is only if you missed it by accident. But if you did it on purpose, if you purposely miss mincha, you do not daven ma'ariv twice. And now, what if I started drinking when it was already time to daven mincha? Is that considered on purpose, meaning it was negligent, right? I should have known better. What am I doing drinking when I have to daven mincha and I got drunk and now I can't daven? That's my own fault. So let's see. So he says, even if you start drinking after the time for mincha comes, you start drinking at 3 p.m. Okay, let's say you started, even if you start drinking at 3 when you already were required to daven mincha, it's still considered an accident because you thought, I would get drunk and I would have enough time for the wine to leave my system and then I could pray. But I kept drinking. And I forgot to pray. That's also called by mistake. However, if it's, let's say, 6:30 and you start getting drunk, and then the sun sets at 7 when it's too late to pray, and this for sure would have been no time for the alcohol to leave your system, then that's called mazid. That's like you were negligent, you did it on purpose, and therefore there is no tashlumin. You do not daven ma'ariv twice because you were bad. So again, if you started drinking early in the afternoon and you mistakenly thought there would be enough time for the wine to leave your system, then you do 2 ma'arivs. But if you start drinking very close to shkia, very close to sunset, and for sure there's not enough time, then you do not daven ma'ariv twice. V'din kriyishma, u'birchos kriyishma, gam kein dinim kriyishma, the blessings of the Shema are like Shema itself. Kedin tefila, hainu de'af shasoi also l'chatchila b'kriyishma, v'levush kasav de'yesh makilim b'kriyishma af im hu shikar, de'shani tefila shehu b'kashas tzarachav. So he brings the opinion of the levush, right? We originally said that just like you can't pray when you're drunk, so too Shema. So the levush is lenient because you need to have more of a focus in a certain sense when you're praying because you're asking for your needs, which you're not doing during Shema. However, the Mishnah Berurah says the Vilna Gaon is stringent with this, and when it comes to Shema, you should not say Shema when you're drunk. Okay, and so he says, really, you shouldn't start drinking before Shema, but if you do, then you should still say Shema. Now, if the alcohol leaves your system before the time for saying Shema is over, then you should say Shema again, right? Because it's not so geschmack that you said Shema when you were drunk. So if, though, the wine leaves your system after you said Shema while drinking, then you should go back and say it again. Aval Shah Brachos. So we said that if you're drunk, you can still make blessings. Klal Bazeh, Af Birkas Hamazon, She'ida Raisa, V'ayin L'kamas, M'goyim, V'zmash Kasavdi Sham. He says even the benching you can do when you're drunk. Yachol Levarich, Aval Ein Mitzarfen Asol L'minyan Asara. Well, the Inyan Shleish L'ziman Efsheh D'Shar. He says, however, when we have 10 people with a minyan for benching, somebody who's drunk should not participate in that minyan, but he's not. He says maybe you could be one of the 3 that they make Birkas Hamazon. Shu Shikor Ayin Be'Be'er Agra Ulefi Dvar V'Yesh Lahachmir L'Chatchila B'Shikor She'en Yachol L'Daber L'Fnei Melech Af B'Shar Brachos. But he writes, if you're drunk to the point where you can't even speak in front of the king, so you're super drunk. If you're super drunk, he says you shouldn't even make blessings. V'Chin Kaz Prima Gadim. B'Chazak Yishaloi Gil Shikor Shalot. Dilav Hachi Kishayti Yechashav L'Gamri L'Kulo Alma Upater as Mikol Mitzvos Al Kein Afilu B'Diavadim Kara as Uberach Lo Mifter B'Kach Shahari Pater Hai B'Asa Shah. So he says, so we have basically another level he's adding. So about other blessings, can you make other blessings when you're drunk? Birkas Hamazon, Asher Yatzar, anything. So he writes that yes, you could. Now some are stringent. If you are drunk to the point where you can't talk in front of the king, if you're that drunk where you wouldn't be able to talk in front of a king, you should try not to make blessings. But then he writes that if you're at the point of Shikrosa Shalot, which is just totally wasted and you have no idea what's going on and you're like really, really wasted, that point you can't make any blessings because you have the halachic status of an imbecile who is not required to perform commandments. Okay, let's go on to halacha beis. Derech mil v'sheina kol shehu mafigin es yayin. So walking a mil, which is about 18 minutes, that can get away. That can cause the wine to leave the system a little bit. We're not talking about drunk. We're talking about where he drank a little bit of wine, like a revius, and he's not drunk. Maybe he's a little tipsy. Maybe. This is when he drank a revius, right? Like he says, but if you drink more, so he says also sleep. If you just drank a revius, meaning a little bit of wine, and you slept for a little bit, that would actually help the wine leave your system. But if you drank more than that and you're really drunk, that'll actually make it worse, so that doesn't help. But if you are traveling on a wagon, that would actually get rid of the wine. Let's see the Mishnah Berurah. Derech mil, bein b'mahalach, bein b'roichev. So there's a debate. We said that traveling will get the wine out of your system. There's a debate, and we said 18 minutes. So that's only if you're walking. Some say that if you are traveling on a wagon, you would need 3 times 18, which is 54 minutes, because I guess you're not putting in as much effort. When we said like a little sleep. So that was, again, what I was just talking about was if you drank a little bit of wine. If you drank a ton of wine and you're drunk, then sleeping makes it worse. But he says if you slept a long time, that would be fine to even get the drunkenness wine out of your system. Avol reichev she'ein lo tarech kol kach. Okay, mafiga yayin v'hu shirachav shlosh milim mikol makom hakol lefi rov hayayin she'im here belishtos ma'od ein derech shlosh milim mifigaso. And then he adds at the end that even traveling for 3 mil won't necessarily help. It depends how much wine you had, and everyone's different. So you have to take that into consideration. Let's finish with halacha gimel, and now, as I was referring to it earlier, the Ramah is going to qualify this law, and I know there were a lot of confusing. We said a lot of information. We'll summarize it at the end. Okay. Whoever is drunk he can tell with himself when the alcohol leaves the system. Therefore, he says we're not so careful with these laws that we've been discussing until now with our wines because they're not so strong. Right? Even in the Ramah's time, which I guess was that was like the 1500s, he says the wines of his day were not so strong. I think in the wines of the Talmud they were much stronger. They would pray even when they drank more than a revius. And he says all the more so if you're using a siddur, right? We had two levels at the beginning that we were talking about. One was you drink a revius of wine, which is like half a cup, and you're not drunk. And the second level was you're drunk and you're not able to speak in front of a king. So regarding the first level, where you just drank a little bit of wine, the Shulchan Aruch said at the beginning that you should not daven if you drank that much. You shouldn't daven, don't pray, wait till it leaves your system. The Ramah writes now that we really don't have to be worried about that so much because our wines aren't that strong anyway. And he says not only that, but you use a siddur to pray, right? If you're drank a little bit and maybe you're slightly tipsy and you're saying everything by heart, you might mess up. But if you have a prayer book in front of you and know all the words, the Ramah says it's fine. So let's see what the Mishnah Berurah says here. However, the Mishnah Berurah points out, that which the Ramah was lenient, saying that you could pray when you're drunk, especially when you have a siddur, that wasn't drunk. That was just you drank a little bit of wine. But if you can't speak in front of the king and you're really drunk, even the Ramah holds you shouldn't pray. And if you pray, it's an abomination. And the Mishnah Berurah brings here, he says, even in the Ramah, he says it's still better not to pray, even if you just drank a little bit. The Yam Shel Shleima says, let me finish the line. He says that on Yantiv, you have a meal, a festive meal, and you drink a little bit to celebrate Yantiv. He says you don't have to wait, and you're not drunk, you just had a little bit. You don't have to wait till the wine leaves your system, and you could pray because otherwise you wouldn't have time for the wine to leave. So it's not such a big deal. And he also says what we mentioned before, that nowadays we don't have kavana so much. Our intent isn't so good anyway, so a little bit of wine isn't going to make it that much worse. So let's just summarize everything we learned. 1, if you drink a little bit of wine, you drink a revius of wine, we're talking half a cup. So really, you should try not to pray if you just did that. But for sure, if the time of prayer is going to pass by, then you should for sure pray. And it's not so clear that you should be that stringent anyway, because the Ramah writes that our wines aren't so strong, and you could pray from a siddur. So if you just drank like half a glass of wine and it's time to pray, you should try not to, but if you have to, it's not such a big deal. However, if you're drunk to the point where you're not even able to speak in front of a king, you drank 2, 3, 4, 5 glasses of wine and you're drunk, you're slurring your words, then you shouldn't pray at all. And even if the time of prayer is going to pass, because it's like an abomination. Now, what's the reason that nowadays we're a little bit more lenient than they were back in the day? 1 is because our wine is not so strong. 2, as the Ramah says, if you're using a siddur, it could help you focus, a prayer book. And number 3, because nowadays our intent is not that great in the first place. So, again, you drink a little bit. Try not to daven, but if you have to, not a big deal. If you are drunk to the point where you can't speak in front of a king, you should not daven, and if you did daven, you have to go back and pray again. Thank you to everyone for coming.